I think we're going to start now, if that's okay with everybody. Can I have your attention? We're going to start. First thing, let's stand and say pledge allegiance to the flags in the back. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. I'd like to do a few introductions before we get going. Actually, Jen Swift here. Not many people know her. She's the Regional Director for Senator Gary Peters' office. So that's Jen. And we have our state rep, Jay DeBoyer, here. And let's see, do I see there's a few people? Vandenbosch isn't here. I'm seeing who, all these people, okay. We have Trustee John DeBoyer. And Maureen Valerie, where is she at?
She just had to run out.
Okay. Okay. Well, if she talks back, and we should just all like start. Okay, I don't know. I was trying to embarrass her. Oh, let's see. We have Dr. Dan Johnson in the back. He's from Algae Wheel, and then there's Joe. Joe, how do you say your last name?
Charlino.
I just met Joe. He's helping with a project at Evoke. What's the name of your company?
That's Evocal Water.
Evocal Water. Thanks for coming. Let's see. On the screen we got Dan. He's the mayor of Naples, New York.
Brian already.
Right.
I'm sorry, Brian. And hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
And let me tell you, we went and visited his town, and it's upstate New York on the Finger Lakes, and it is beautiful. And if anyone, it's about a 7-hour drive. I know I got to take my sweetie back there for a weekend, and if you go there, stay at the Naples Hotel. It's haunted, and there's ghosts too. So. Yeah, it's a good spot to go. We have project control engineer people, John Monty, Mark Savoy, Sanavy, and Connor. Connor's our new carbon credit guy. So, yeah. So, okay, that's it for introductions, I think. Anybody else I'm missing? Can't think. I did see Bob Coombs walking in here. There, Bob, he's helping us out with the project. Actually, we're going to try to, he's actually donating the site for the possible location of this that we'll be talking about. And it's exciting. And I was thinking first we've got to say, how do we get here? A lot of things were happening at the same time. The wastewater treatment plant on the mainland, the county wanted to get out of the business. So they said, we're turning this over to you guys, us being Clay, Elginak, and Ira, and we're forming an authority to manage that. And then at the same time, they were saying, we might have to double your capacity of this plant. And because of this stuff that was going on at 26 Mile Road. So we were starting looking at different ways of doing that. And that's where we discovered this algae technology. And then from there, we kind of ran across Algae Wheel. And doing that, we thought, man, that technology fits perfect for Harsens Island. So we contacted them, went out to New York, saw a plant, went out to Indiana with a few, saw a plant, and it seems like a good fit so far. And then we went seeking funding, is Kevin. Hey, Kevin Hertel. We were waiting for you. And Bob McAdams, our senators for the state. And so we were seeking funding. We figured it was going to take $4 million. And Senator Hertel got us a line item for pay for $2 million of it. Thank you. It was so because like I say, the total project's going to probably be $3.5 to $4 million. So we set it up in phases. Phase 1 is going to be to build the plant and hook up the town. Where we're at in the process, we're going before Eagle Tuesday for a pre-application meeting and to tell them what we want to do and everything else. So I'm not, we really can't do a whole lot until we get the Eagle permit. So I'm going to try like heck to expedite that as soon as we can. And once we get that, we can start prepping the property and doing what we want to do. But first what I was going to do is turn it over to Dan Johnson. Or no, Brian, I'm sorry, because we don't want to lose him. Brian is the mayor of New York, Naples, New York, and they put a plant in, did we just lose him? And they put basically the same plant in Naples, New York. His town, I think it was 1,800 people, Brian? Your town? Are you on?
1,042, Artie.
1,042. And I wanted him to share experience what this did for his town, the economic growth.
I'm sorry, Artie, I hope the internet stabilizes. I've got your back now.
All right, sounds good. But go ahead and talk to everybody how it worked in Naples.
Yeah, so, very quickly, I think the environmental need and the impact is something that we probably don't even need to talk about. That's pretty well known these days, the environmental need of appropriate waste treatment infrastructure. But what I really wanted to talk about is the economic impact associated with not having appropriate infrastructure. The village of Naples, a community of 1,042 people, had in excess of 11 empty storefronts only 5 years ago. And the reason that was occurring is we couldn't support businesses that wanted to occupy spaces in the village of Naples due to inappropriate waste treatment infrastructure. We lost opportunities, in essence. Opportunities at chocolate manufacturer, opportunities at small brewery manufacturers, a number of restaurants. So again, that need economically absolutely existed. And we did actually investigate several different types of waste treatment. Aerobic digestion, there's actually a winery within the village of Naples that had an aerobic digestion system, but it was built in the early to mid-1970s. We considered partnering with that facility and upgrading the facility to meet our needs. However, your cost benefit with older technology tends to wane over time. And after being introduced to the Algae Wheel system by our engineers, Artie saw it. He probably saw the same thing that I saw. This is amazing technology. It's green infrastructure, number one. I call it Mother Nature on steroids. We literally take Mother Nature in this scenario and contain it in a greenhouse environment, and nature does its thing in that environment, and it was absolutely a perfect fit for this community. Long story short, we have maybe two empty storefronts, and they're empty for different reasons other than appropriate infrastructure. We gained 11 new business 11 new businesses, including restaurants and other type of businesses in the middle of the pandemic. This is when our infrastructure went online. So I can't stress enough the beneficial impact that this had on our community economically. Again, environmentally, I think we all understand that piece. The economic piece is it was extremely important to our community. When I pulled in tonight, I couldn't find a place to park. Somebody parked in the place that said mayor parking only. I don't know. But not having a place to park is generally a good sign that things are going pretty well. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just wanted to give you the brief overview of the need that happened here, how we addressed it, and what the outcome was. And we are a little over 2 years online at this point, and it's going extremely well.
Anybody have any questions for Brian?
Cost of maintenance.
Well, it's apples and oranges with his plant.
All right.
Brian, do you get any complaints of smell or odor or anything from your plant?
Well, you know, in full disclosure, actually, yes, it did occur, but those conditions are a matter of human error. This plant is different from most any plant that any operator that is used to standardized systems has experienced. We did experience some odor issues. They're not ongoing, but they were a condition of human error, and those are correctable conditions. And once you correct them, it's not an ongoing issue. Again, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that it didn't occur. It certainly did. But once we figured out what the issue was, correction, it's a learning curve. I think that's the best way I can put it. On an ongoing basis, when people drive by our treatment facility, they don't even know it's a treatment facility. It's a greenhouse. It looks like a greenhouse. It sits on an agricultural piece of land, and unless there's an odor, nobody knows that that's exactly what it is. So odors, it's designed not to have that issue. If it does, a human error almost certainly occurred, and
We're working on that internet connection in Naples, New York now. All right, well, let's move on. And next I wanted to, hey Brian, we got you, maybe.
yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I hope I finished before, I hope I finished that. In essence, any odor issues are a condition of human error, and they're short-lived. If you're experiencing them, chances are it was a human error that caused it, but it is a short-lived scenario, and when things are running as they should, then it's certainly, we don't have ongoing issues.
All right, thank you.
How big is this plant, Artie?
His plant, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, it does 100,000 gallons a day, and you're in the process of putting another one in to double your processing. Is that right, Dan?
He does 50,000
Or
today,
50.
and he's gonna go up to 150,000.
Yeah. They're in the process of building a second one there.
Correct.
How much of the community is hooked up?
What did he say? All but two that went by did hook up. Isn't that what he told us yesterday?
Yeah, everybody, so they sewered the downtown area, and then they took the sewer out to the plant, and only 2 people along the phase 1 decided not to hook up. So everybody else hooked up, and so he did sort of the same thing as hook up if you like. Nobody was forced to hook up, so it was all voluntary, but only 2 people opted out.
And what was the reason for not?
Just one lady said, I've never had it, I don't think I need it, so she didn't hook up. That was kind of her position. She actually is the one that lives right next door to the wastewater plant. And I didn't get a chance to talk to the other person, but she just like, didn't think we needed it, I'm not here, I've lived here, so whatever, so she didn't hook up. So,
Was there an expense? And what was the expense?
I think if they hooked up originally, I don't know if there was an expense or if it was nominal. Was there an expense or was it an?
I think they're doing the same model that we followed, that you could get a hookup at free while we're doing the installation. But then if you gotta come back, there's a regular tap-in fee.
Yeah, I think for the two that come back on now, he said it was gonna be $3,500 for them to come on now, but he said, if they just do it, they'll do it for free. That's what he told me, because he's like, he wants 100% update, but.
Okay.
What's the impact per
What kind of staff
household?
They have one operator. They have one operator
I think
who.
that'll be, if you had passed that.
An 8-hour day or?
Yeah, and he also plows roads and cuts, does some other duties too. So he comes in the morning for about 3 hours, and then he comes in the afternoon to make sure things are okay. But he does have some kind of splits duties and other city stuff.
We give him a mic, Artie.
Yeah, he's gonna be up next.
Yeah. He was just a village maintenance person prior to the plant being constructed, but he wasn't licensed, so he just finished his licensing process. So he just got his license. So he operated the plant unlicensed for the first 2 years. They actually had a contract operator that helped him.
So what kind of license was that?
It's a state license, so it's issued by Eagle, and so usually you have to take a class and get a certain number of hours of exposure to maintenance, and then you take a test and you get your introductory license and you can move on. So.
Hey Dan, you wanna start your,
Yeah.
we're gonna do questions and answers at the end.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So, I like to talk. I used to be a college professor, so I just, all day long. So if you start asking me questions, we'll just be here all night long, just, So, so I'm with Algae Wheel. I actually used to consult for Algae Wheel for a couple of years, and then in 2014 I came on full time with Algae Wheel. And I'm their chief technology officer when our founder retired. And so I've been with them since 2014. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you a video real quick, just show you kind of what it looks like inside of a wastewater plant. I'll show you a few videos of some other facilities we've done and kind of give you the background, a little bit of a case study about how they're sort of relevant to your particular situation as well. So you can see what we've done in the past. So this is like 50 seconds, so I'll kind of talk over it a little bit. So most of this video comes from a facility in central Indiana. So this one is in down by Indianapolis area, roughly, just east of Indianapolis. And basically these wheels are, just suspended on a shaft which doesn't turn, so the shaft is just, sitting there. They're holding the wheels in place, so the wheels kind of float. They're buoyant in the water. And we use air bubbles to turn those wheels around in a circle. So what that does is they go into the water, they pick up contamination, and they come out of the water, and then they give off oxygen, and so they just continually rotate in and out of the water. And you can see they're green, and that's because they're covered in algae and a mix of bacteria. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll try not to get too geeky or sciencey or anything along those lines, but basically if you were to take the wheels apart and kind of turn them in, this is our cartoon, but this is the outside. So these little bubbles, they're coarse bubbles, they catch underneath here, and then they make this side lighter and they cause it to turn. I kind of think of Little House on the Prairie with the water wheel that they used to run the timber mill, but the current of the water turned the wheel. In this case, instead of the water, we're using air bubbles to turn the wheel. And then on the inside, we put different kinds of media that's on the center, which has bacteria on it. And all wastewater treatment basically uses bacteria to treat wastewater. So the idea behind wastewater treatment is, we all go to the bathroom, right? We had a book when my daughter was a kid, so we all poop, right? That was the name of the book. We all do that. And eventually, that all ends up in the water. So it ends up in the groundwater, it ends up in the rivers and things along those lines. So what we're trying to do is instead of having the bacteria in the river treat that water, where we want to swim or fish or whatever, we try to do it in a wastewater plant. So that way when the water hits the river, it's already clean. That's basically the goal from an environmental perspective. But the interesting thing about the algae wheel system is that we're incorporating algae as well. And algae are pretty cool, right? They treat water as well, but one of the things that they do, fun fact, 70% of the oxygen on the planet is produced by algae. So when you think, about oxygen and breathing, it's produced primarily by algae. Not by trees, not by grass, but by algae. Trees and grass produce oxygen, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot more being produced by algae. So we're using the algae to produce oxygen to help the bacteria do their job. And what that does is that reduces the electrical consumption of the wastewater treatment facility, and it reduces the operations cost, and it makes everything work a lot smoother. It makes everything more stable. So this is kind of what I just said. So, whenever the sunlight hits algae, they do photosynthesis, just like any other plant. That produces oxygen. We use terms like biological oxygen demand here, which is science code for poop. And this is NH4, this is ammonium, which is science, this is chemistry code for pee, basically. But both of those processes need oxygen. So if you want to get rid of carbon, you have to use oxygen. If you want to get rid of nitrogen, you have to put in a lot of oxygen. So the primary cost of all wastewater treatment plants is basically just pumping oxygen into a wastewater treatment plant. Okay, that's where it comes from. So the main advantage of this algae wheel system is that the algae are producing a huge amount of oxygen to subsidize that, so these bacteria aren't reliant on a massive blower that's going to be expensive to run. Whenever you break down carbon, it makes carbon dioxide. Well, guess what algae eat? Algae use carbon dioxide, and they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in order to make more algal cells. You get more algal cells, you get more oxygen. So there's a nice little loop here where we're subsidizing the oxygen that's coming from the blower. Same thing on the ammonia side. You produce oxygen, and then they produce other forms of nitrogen, which the algae can also use. So I can make a lot more arrows here, but it gets really complicated. But it impacts a lot of other chemicals in the water as well. So it's really interesting stuff. So really what the algae wheel is trying to do, like if we went out to the river here and we grabbed a rock from the river, everything that's in a wastewater treatment plant is also on that rock. So you've got algae, you've got bacteria that eats your poop, you've got bacteria that eats the pee, you've got little bugs, you've got rotifers, you've got worms, you've got little crustaceans, everything is growing on that rock. Basically what Algae Wheel is trying to do is to create a high rate river. I call it my river in a box. So I want to use the Algae Wheel system to clean the water before the water gets to the river. That's basically what I'm trying to do. So, so that's really what we're trying to take advantage of. Does that make sense? Yeah. This is just a map. I wanted to show you kind of where a lot of our wastewater treatment plants are. We started in Indiana. So, of course, a lot of our facilities are in Indiana. We have some facilities in Illinois now. Got some stuff going on up in Wisconsin that's moving forward. Iowa, New Albin, Iowa. That's a kind of a fun wastewater plant. I was there last week. You actually have to drive into Minnesota and then hook back around to get to the wastewater plant because they're 5 feet away from the state line, which is kind of cool. And then we have a plant under construction in Colorado, which you can't see on this map. We've got 8 plants in Mexico. And we're building some plants now in Egypt, and I'm going to build my first plant in France this year. So we're growing rapidly at this point. But we started here in the Midwest. I'm actually from Illinois. Don't hold that against me, though. So I'm going to run through just some pictures of some facilities so you can kind of see what some of these look like and kind of get an idea. So this is one in Iowa. It's at a place called West Lake, so it sits right along a lake. Fishing, campgrounds, some residences are on this wastewater plants as well. Kind of gets crazy flow, gets a lot of flow in summer because people come there and fish and hang out and use their cabins, and then it gets very little flow in the wintertime. So it's about 4 times the flow in the summer as it does in the winter. They actually had some issues with power lines during some straight line winds, so then after that they came back and put in solar panels. And so now there's enough panels there that it pays for 100% of the electrical cost for the plant. So they put in 3 times the panels that they actually need, so now they're net metering, and so they're feeding it back to the grid, so they don't really have an electrical bill anymore. So I think that's kind of a cool story, because when do you ever hear about a wastewater plant that doesn't use electricity? So that's kind of cool. This is a video. So this is Lake Okeechobee, and the reason I put this in here, we are just kind of finishing up, buttoning up a few little things here down at Lake Okeechobee. But this was a project we did down there because they're having a lot of problems with water quality in Lake Okeechobee. And there's been a lot of finger pointing that went along with it, like whose fault is it? Is it the fertilizer companies? Is it the cow farms? Is it whatever? And so what they actually came up with is they think about 75% of the problem is the water coming out of the septic tanks and going into the rivers. And there's no carbon in that water, but there's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus, which is causing algal blooms in the rivers. And people are starting to finally get really irritated because their dogs are going down to the rivers and they're drinking out of the rivers, and there's enough algal, like toxic algae in the rivers that it's actually killing the dogs. And then that water is going to the seashore, and then once that nitrogen hits the Gulf or hits the Atlantic side, it's causing massive algal blooms in the ocean. So now Florida is basically saying they want to try to get rid of all septic tanks. That's kind of on paper what they've said they want to do. Will it happen? That's a huge project. I'm not sure if it'll ever happen. But this project, what we did is we built a new wastewater plant. There was a failing plant that wasn't meeting their limits. We built a new wastewater plant, but we also added 10 homes that had septic tanks that were all failing, and all the water was just running into the lake. So we put them on sewers, and now they're part of the wastewater treatment plant as well. So sort of similar from the standpoint that it went septic to sewer. And there's no greenhouse here because it's Florida. so nothing freezes in Florida. So you can see there's a house right behind it. So there's houses right behind this facility here. It's all complete. It's actually right in the middle of the community. And then the lake is just right over to the side. So can you hear it? So you just hear the bubbles going, so just hear the bubbles turning the wheels. This is what the inside of Naples, New York, their algae wheel tanks look like. They're inside of a greenhouse. Brian summed it up pretty well. Basically their downtown was done for, right? They couldn't put any new businesses in because they couldn't put any toilets in any of those businesses, and so the downtown was just shutting down. So septic tanks were failing, it's kind of hard to fix that stuff. So they put this system in, 50,000 gallons a day. They sewered the downtown area, and then they put in a main line that went out to the wastewater treatment plant, and they offered everybody between downtown and the wastewater plant that they could connect. And like I said, everybody hooked up at 2 people.
How big are those plants? I mean, how big is that stuff?
So, and this one, these wheels here, this is kind of Algae Wheel 1.0. The Lake Okeechobee's, for lack of a better term, 2.0. These are 15 inches in diameter. The ones at Lake Okeechobee are 36 inches in diameter. So, not monstrous. Like the wastewater tank, if it were sitting on the ground, would be up to about here on me. So, not massive by any means. But they just rotate, but they do the same thing. We made them a little bigger so we could make the footprint smaller, basically. So it took up less space. So Brian's phase 2, here you can hear the blowers. You hear the mayor talking in the background too. So, but it's kind of funny, you can hear people talking over the sound of the wastewater treatment plant inside of the wastewater treatment plant. So it's actually not a sound issue or anything along those lines. So that's the Naples, New York facility. So they're going to be adding another 100,000 gallons of capacity to now sewer the entire community. So everybody in Naples, New York will have a sewer.
For a plant that's 100,000 gallons capacity, what's the horsepower of air that you would need?
Okay, so like this one here, the motors are on variable frequency drive, so they're turned down. So this one's 50,000 gallons. It's running on about 9.5 horsepower, something along those lines.
Really?
Yeah,
It's like a big hot tub board.
Yeah.
so, which, a comparable size traditional wastewater treatment plant for this would be running on about 60 horsepower,
Okay.
to give you an idea. So, yeah, so about 75% less power is kind of an average reduction cost. This one, I just put it in here because I'm proud of it. We just built this one. This one's northwest of Cairo in Egypt. So imagine not having water in Cairo and trying to feed people. So 100% of the water for this wastewater treatment plant is going to irrigating their food crops. So we're treating the wastewater, it's going into an irrigation canal, then they're doling out the water to irrigate their fruits and vegetables. So I just think it's kind of cool, and so we're involved in a big program to install more wastewater treatment plants in rural communities for irrigation. So sort of an interesting project. This is another one that we did. This is kind of a micro wastewater treatment plant, for lack of a better word. This is at a school. It looks like a high school. It is in the middle of nowhere, kind of. But you can see here that it's nice and clean and flat, and then in this one there's no big greenhouse, it's just got a cover, but this has a subsurface discharge, and all of this area here is irrigated by subsurface pipes, so you can see it's green. Can you see where the pipes stop? Up here and here? So down there's no water reaching that area, so there's no vegetation growing there. So these schools that we're working with in Mexico, actually a lot of them are using them to irrigate gardens, or they're using them to irrigate their soccer fields. So, because of course Mexico is a pretty water-stressed country. And this is another one, another type of greenhouse we worked on. This one's actually at 7,000 feet above sea level. It's on an indigenous peoples reservation, for lack of a better term. And they are using this also to irrigate food crops. So we're treating the wastewater there to irrigate food crops. So pretty interesting, pretty versatile, mostly in rural areas, small communities, things along those lines. So to answer some questions, Artie?
That, or if you want to wait till after they're done, then we'll open up for questions.
I can wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm John Monte from Project Control Engineering. We're actually the township engineers. We've been the engineers for quite a few years here. We're fortunate in this process as we were going through some different alternatives, as Artie had mentioned earlier, with the plant in Algonac between Algonac Clay and Ira, looking at alternatives for wastewater treatment and how could we divide it up if we needed to, and we were fortunate to run across Dan Johnson and Algae Wheel with this technology. It's just because it's green technology, it's so good for the environment and everything, and it fits the bill for your situation in particular, where you can have very high flows, for example, in the summertime when you have a lot of people here, and in the wintertime with low flows. So our task really here is to, our job actually is to put this project together and make it happen. So that'll be along with cooperation with Dan and his group with their technology that they have. We'll be putting the drawings together for the site as well as the collection system. And so this is just an overall map of the area. Probably not the greatest aerial photograph, but here's town right here. And this is Maple Street. The proposed site right now is at the end of Maple Street, right here, this location. And what our phase one technically is, and this again all depends on any additional grant funding that we're able to obtain. But phase one would be to construct the plant itself and then get the main line out into town. Phase two, if we're fortunate enough to get a little bit more money, actually a lot more money, would be the other colors that you see here running up the other streets in town, and that would be the next phase. Those are all, at this point, we're all just subject to change. This is all very preliminary. We have our next task that we have is to meet with Eagle, which we're doing this week. This is a little blow-up view of at the end of Maple Street, the site itself, showing the plant and the parking lot, and a little bit of future expansion that we'll have. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't talking into it very well. So our big challenge here is this site. This is an idea of roughly what it looks like with the components in it. We're proposing right now that everything be under one roof, which will have translucent panels on it, so similar to a greenhouse. A small portion of it will not. It'll be the front headworks portion of the building. But in general, this is the concept plan of what it's going to look like. And again, it'll all be indoors. It's a pretty nice self-contained facility. And they have a lot of experience with this in other locations. The site that we're dealing with, what this is showing here, is if you look at the dotted lines, everything in between here is wetlands. So we're forced to work with the site that is in a great location. We're hoping we're going to have a pre-application conference with Eagle this next week. And we're hoping that due to the good of this project and the reasonings for it, that they'll allow us to utilize this site and hopefully without any mitigation. Typically, if you destroy a wetland, you have to buy wetland credits or something like that, which they don't specifically really want you to do to begin with. But that's our next major task. We're all on board with it. We have the meeting set up. We have a lot of people attending the meeting on our behalf, and we're hoping that we can get over this hurdle. So that's why at this point we can't really tie down construction costs fully. We have some good costs that Dan has been able to share with us from other projects that he's had, and we put together some numbers on the collection system. But again, it's preliminary because if we can't use this site, things change immediately. So for those reasons, we were actually hoping to come here tonight and be able to give you some ideas of operating costs, which is very, very low in relation to any other facility. These are very minor. We were hoping to be able to give you that, but we really don't know the cost yet until we get across some of these hurdles. So that's about it on our end.
So, John was mentioning costs and what we're doing at the township. We're going to set up a separate fund that will manage this. And so there won't be any intermingling funds with sewer plant on the mainland or anything else. It will be an enterprise fund. And how sewers funds work and water, it is supported by user fees that we pay every month or every 3 months. And that's ultimately what will support this. This plant, though, we do have the possibility of selling our algae, and that's kind of an unknown. What we get in return, I mean, Dan's guessing we could maybe get $10,000 a year for the algae sales. We will be producing carbon credits, and I just learned today, Dan, he's going to try to verify it, right? I mean, we think we are the first wastewater treatment plant in the whole country to utilize carbon credits. Am I right, Dan?
I think you are.
We think we are.
I've not been able to find another one.
In the whole country to utilize carbon credits. We'll definitely be the only one in Michigan doing algae. The first one for algae. So whatever we reap from that would go back into the fund and go against the operating costs of the plant. What's it going to cost me to sign up? Well, we don't know exactly yet. As they said, the operation of these plants is low. In the Eagle permit, they will tell us how many man hours a week, we're going to need. It could be 4, 6, 8. We're not sure. In the beginning, it's going to take more man hours to iron down the process and make sure there isn't user error and creating problems. And but I mean, I threw some rough numbers together. I don't think, I'm looking at, $50,000 to operate this plant. When we use the solar panels, our electrical will be minimal. A plant this size, if we didn't use the solar panels, would take about $5,000 a year in electrical costs. We won't have that. We're gonna have to hire someone to do walkthroughs and, cut the grass and make sure the place looks nice and everything. But the cost of running this plant is very minimal compared to other technologies, other plants. So, I mean, I'm hesitant to throw a number out, and also it's a function on how many people sign up. Because the more people sign up, the cost of running this plant is a fixed cost. It really doesn't fluctuate much if 150 people are hooked up or 50 people are hooked up. So the more people that hook up, the lower the cost is. So I'm guessing right now it's going to be $35 to $45 a month to hook up. Marty, why should I hook up when my septic field doesn't cost me anything? And well, it doesn't cost you anything right now, but sooner or later it will. And I am not sure what Rattree gets to pump out, like $400, $400 or $500. So it will cost you something at some point in time. And like Mark was saying, that we're seeing where people are trying to rebuild their septic field, and if you're 50 feet from wetlands, do you have the wetland slide? If you're 50 feet from wetlands, they're not going to let you. And I know of 2 places on the island where they basically condemned them, and they said you can go there during the day, but you can't spend the night. And I mean, it's a tough situation, so trying to get ahead of the curve here, what we're trying to do too. So like I say, in the beginning, there's no charge to hook up. We're there, we can, installing the line, we'll be able to hook you up. If we have to come back later, there's going to be a tap-in fee. What that is, I'm not sure. What's a tap-in fee now for a sewer on the mainland? Do you know? $1,800.
$50 for an inspection.
And then, okay. But there'll be tap-in fees, so that's it in a nutshell as far as costs. Like I say, there are unknowns. See if I forgot any plumps. They were saying yeah, okay. Oh, another reason to hook up too, because we all know that our land's expensive, and if I hook up, I can repurpose my property where the septic field is. I can build a garage there. I could put a shed there, but you can't if you have an existing septic field. There is a community in Lake Worth, in Sanilac County, and they had a lake, and a big percentage of their septics were failing. the state went in there and they said, we're condemning you all until you get a septic system put in. And of course, you know, they had to do it on the fly, and they were looking at a conventional septic system. And the cost to do that, the special assessment to pay for it was more than the value of every house on this lake. So the state actually went in and kicked in money. This is about 8-9 years ago in Lake Worth, and lowered it, but the assessment still was about half the value of their homes to do this. And that's what we're really trying to avoid. You know, I don't know if it will come to that. I sure hope not, but you know, we don't know. We got to prepare for the future. So, Senator, do you want to say a few words?
Good evening, everybody. I got to tell you, and I told Artie this many times, and I think every time I'm here and I'm here with people on the island, this truly is a special place. And every time I get on the ferry to come over here, I feel my blood pressure drop. So I love this. I was over here in February to meet with Artie. He showed me, I think I told Artie I'd like to solve problems. And he said, well, I'm going to show you plenty of problems that the state can solve. And so he brought up a lot of issues on that day, but one thing that really stuck with me was being in downtown San Souci, seeing the need to find a solution for the sewage issue there. Watching the money being spent at the San Souci bar being restored, listening to the business owners there and the challenges that they've had. And so we went to work. I came back here in March. We met with business owners. We were invited back by some of the business owners and met with business owners, heard some of the problems then. Jay pushed me many times to let me know this was a problem that needed to be solved. And we tried to find the resources to at least get San Souci into a place where we can properly treat the sewage. Not have to put it on a truck and take it over to the ferry. That doesn't make any sense to me. We were able to get $2 million from the line item in the budget directly to Clay Township in order to put this facility up. And we are working through the next hurdle right now with Eagle. Sometimes I feel like I'm the mediator between Artie and Eagle. But I understand they can be challenging to work with at times. I've dealt with those issues, I've dealt with those issues as I was a state rep in St. Clair Shores, and we were working with Candace Miller to solve a combined sewer overflow problem there. And I took Eagle on then, and I will continue to work to make sure they focus on finding solutions to these problems that work for communities. This is a unique place. It takes unique solutions to solve some of these problems. And so I'm glad that Artie went to work and found this, what I would call a very unique treatment facility. But we know it's worked in other places, so it's very easy to make the case now that we should be able to do it here as well. And I think once you do this here, other places, other communities in the state of Michigan who are experiencing similar issues are going to look towards Harsens Island as a solution to their problems as well. So I'm hopeful that Eagle next week in the meeting. We've already started pushing them through my office to help them look at this in a realistic way. We're hopeful that through those conversations they approve this plan and we're able to move forward. When we can all go to San Souci Bar and have a beer together, the first round's on me. And hold me to that.
I'll find him. We got you on film here.
This guy's got it on video. He follows me around the camera all the time, trying to get me to say something silly.
I don't think you've ever drank with Harsens Islanders, clearly.
I'll try to keep up. But honestly, we want to be a resource to any of the problems we can solve. And I know once we get beyond this issue, and I'm glad we had the resources in the budget to be able to provide this funding now. But once we get beyond this issue, we don't stop, right? Anything that we can do to help and be a resource to the state, that's what we want to do. I ran for office to solve problems, and that's what I will continue to do across this entire district. And Harsens Island is a special place I want to help any way I can. So thank you very much for having me.
That's all I need. So Artie had talked to me about this a little bit as well, and I reached out to Kevin, and I'll tell you that Kevin and I have developed a pretty good relationship because we have a few things we don't necessarily agree on. But when it comes to the environment, when it comes to Lake St. Clair, when it comes to Harsens Island, I think we're on the exact same page. You know, I spoke with Kathy about the bar, and you know, what I said was, we as Clay Township, Harsens Island residents, we kind of got used to this issue, right? And it just became normal. We're pumping and we're hauling, we're doing all this stuff. Well, now as we start to dig into this product that I think is going to be so minimally invasive, so reasonable to operate, that it's going to be able to change it for the citizens that are on Harsens Island. You're going to have options to go downtown and eat dinner in some shops and stores and grocery stores and those kinds of things. And you kind of forget the benefit of having that when you're living on the island because it's been that way for so long. So, Kevin, I just want to say thanks. Obviously, I'm a constituent of yours, right? And I appreciate you going to bat there with the governor, which you do have a really good ear, close ear there with her, and it conveniently worked out well for us here. So thank you for that. So that's it. Obviously, Kevin and I are always available for any questions or issues that you may have.
Thank you. Well, we have Dr. Dan here and John Monty and a few other people here that are way smarter than me. So does anybody have any questions? I'll walk around and you can ask them. And
you told us what the gallon usage per day for the one in Naples is. What's the gallon usage here, and how many can hook up to it?
this one is going to be 25,000 gallons a day. And what do we figure, how many people can hook up to this?
120, roughly.
About 120 homes.
What's the bar?
Yeah.
The hookup from the street, apparently you're going to go down the street and then you're going to be able to go hook up to houses, businesses. Do we have to supply the hookup from the house all the way to the street as a homeowner?
Yes. Yes.
4-inch pipe.
My first question is, it doesn't sound like we're going to have even close to a full-time person manning this just a few hours a day. What is the plan if something happens during the night? When the ferry's jammed, when, you know, anything like that?
We can still get across. I can talk loud. So most of the facilities that are this size use what we call contract operators. So they're private, you know, might be, a lot of times it might be a guy who, I don't know, hypothetically works at New Baltimore, or a guy who works at Algae Wheel. And so he might have a side job where he also does like work here, right? So that's pretty common for a facility this size, not to have a full-time employee, but to subcontract that out. That's one thing. And usually on this size facility, like the one that we saw in Indiana that was 20,000 gallons a day, that one, the contractor is bills 7 hours a week for that facility. So that's it. And then there's another one that's in Indiana where they bill 8. And my one in Illinois, I think he bills 7 as well. It's in northern Illinois. It's a trailer park. It's got 120 trailers. It's 30,000 gallons a day. So that's about the time commitment roughly from that perspective. In terms of emergency stuff, alerts, after hours sorts of things, because these receive so little, like say, in-person attention, right? Because they're small and it's hard to justify a full-time employee just to take care of one small piece of infrastructure. They have a control system which hooks up. It can hook up by cell phone or internet or anything along those lines. And basically it sends out alarms to the operators and typically the owners. So, or you might get an alarm at 3 in the morning saying something broke, a blower turned off or a pump turned off. things along those lines. So the operators get those alarms, and that's in their contract that they have to respond to those alarms, right? So they are required by their contract to do that. But then also, the other nice thing is that my operator who has been operating plant, he's 68 years old, he's been operating plants now for about 43 years. He can actually then go into the system, he can diagnose what's wrong with the system through the computer on his computer or his cell phone, and he can also make changes and actually, implement backup situations through his phone. And the operator can do that too and see what's going on, and they say, okay, the alarm went off, it was this, it's resolved, I can turn the alarm off, oh, I do need to go out there. And so they can do that sort of a thing. We have some more isolated facilities where they have sort of a maintenance designee, so to speak, where it's kind of like the helper to the operator. And so if the operator is too far away or another project, there's another guy or person who's familiar enough with the situation, they can pop in and check and make small adjustments without having a lot of knowledge. So we do have some facilities like that. Like at some of our schools, it's the groundskeeper, right? We have somebody, groundskeeper, who just peeks his head in every day, make sure everything smells okay, make sure all the wheels are turning, make sure the blowers are running, and okay, open the door, checked it, okay, close the door, see you later. That sort of thing. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how it works. But usually, I tend to spend 6 to 8 hours would be fair, for the operator to be out there for most of the day.
The facility itself, being that there's a lot of water and we got winter time.
Yes.
What's the deal with that?
From freezing? Okay. So the buildings themselves, so we use a greenhouse provider from Colorado. You can guess what they started their business making greenhouses for in Colorado. But they started making them in Colorado, and so they're built with heaters and with cooling systems that are in the greenhouse as well. It's kind of cool. The wall can actually come down to, let it cool air come in if you need to, if you want to. And they've got emergency heaters in there, so we can keep the temperature at 40 degrees or above during the winter time so things don't freeze. That's the main reason we cover them. It's just to keep them from freezing. And fun fact, sewage actually is usually around 58 to 60 degrees temperature because of the bacterial action that's in that water.
Yeah, I figured that.
So it actually also helps to keep the building warm. Yeah.
The mechanical equipment.
Yep, that's all inside the building, so it should all be pretty good with the heater system for the building. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Naples gets pretty cold. Naples, in the wintertime, they're like they're 10 degrees Fahrenheit. We have one that's on Lake Michigan, on the south shore of Lake Michigan. That one gets loads of snow. I mean, that one almost gets buried sometimes. So we've got some that are pretty cold. Naples gets, in the wintertime, water temperatures sometimes get as low as 41 degrees because it gets so cold and the ground freezes so deep. So, yeah, so it gets pretty chilly. Yeah, I'm sorry.
How does, you said you needed sun for the process.
Right.
Colorado is similar to us.
Yeah.
January, February, you're gonna get less than 8 hours, more like 6 hours.
Right.
How is it utilizing? Are you supplementing the sun with light, with UV lights?
Right, so we do not typically supplement. Pardon me, I've got bronchitis. We do not typically supplement. So one thing is, algae is used to growing underwater, right? So one cool thing is that whenever it gets brought out of the water, it gets extra illuminated. So even in the, thank you so much. Even in the wintertime when there's lower light, that's sufficient amount of light for them to actually do photosynthesis and produce oxygen. We size the system in order to be able to be run in these northern climates because as the wheels come out of the water, they also get exposed to atmosphere so they can do the job and get enough oxygen. So at nighttime, the oxygen level will drop, but it'll stabilize at around, science stuff, 4 milligrams per liter. But then during the daytime, it'll peak back up again, it'll get to a really high level, and then it can coast back down at night. But we kind of oversize them so they can rotate to get extra aeration at nighttime, so if we can supplement it.
And what's the closest residence to any of the facilities?
So that we have in existence right now? We have, like, in terms of like a physical neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, like the next lot over. The one, my favorite one is in Indiana where the bleachers for the football field are about 5 yards away from the edge of the greenhouse, and it's 10 yards away from the left field foul post. And their shot put and discus ring is in the parking lot of the wastewater plant. So, and we've never had a complaint. So I can tell you, like Brian was really nice because he said it's human error. And so one of the things they had a problem with, their operators never operated a wastewater plant. And so he was kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool right off the bat. And so they had one piece of equipment the poor guy didn't know how to operate, and he was trying to operate it, and that kind of caused the odor. And they got that taken care of. And so we sent somebody out there and taught him how to run it. Taught him how to use the piece of equipment. It's a piece of equipment they use for drying the solids so you can throw it away in the garbage, basically. So you can get it dried out so you can throw it in the landfill, which is the most economical way to dispose of it. He just didn't know how to do it, so we just made sure he got some education. And so that took care of it.
And what would happen if Eagle denies it? What's the backup plan?
So I've already talked to Eagle. So like my grandpa says, it's not my first rodeo. I did the first one in Illinois, first one in Indiana, first one in Missouri, first one in Iowa, first one in New York. So I kind of have gotten used to the process, and it is a process. Like the regulators aren't mean people; they're just cautious people. And so they want to make sure it's going to work, and they don't want to get in trouble and cause an environmental problem. So I've already had some conversations with Eagle. We've gone through some data. We've shown them the process. Everybody likes it so far. We've had no issues from a technology standpoint about the algae wheel portion. Now, I can't say anything about the site selection. I can't say anything about that. That's not what I do. But from my technology perspective, no pushback so far. I'm just providing them with the documentation that they've requested to date so we can make sure they've got everything that they feel comfortable.
And there's 10 state standard too that
Yeah.
Michigan belongs to.
Yeah, so we have this thing in the wastewater world called 10 state standards, and so it's 10 north central US states from New York to Iowa, and includes Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Missouri. And we've kind of set out a design standard for those states because the climate's relatively similar. And so all of the Eagles and the IDEMs and the EPAs have all kind of got together and said, if somebody builds a plant and follows these rules in this book, we're going to be good. And so, us being from Indiana, we were required on our first plant in Indiana to follow those rules, because Indiana follows those rules. So, all of our plants are already designed to the exact same standards that Eagle requires. So, I don't really foresee any issues. It's just a process. You know, it's just like anything else in life, it's just a process. So.
What's that kind of material are the main type of material?
In terms of the construction material of the actual system, a lot of stainless steel. So the airlines and the shafts are on the main system are stainless steel. It's kind of cool because we're just getting ready. I'm working with a new plastics manufacturer in southern Indiana to start using recycled plastics and bioplastics that are made out of coffee. So it'll actually be partially bioplastic and partially recycled polypropylene with fiberglass reinforcement is the concept.
We don't know anything about that.
They're all that material, all the bushings are that material, so you've got like-on-like wear patterns, and then all of the support structures are stainless steel.
Okay, I was wondering about the reservoir, like when all this goes into a holding tank, or then you got sand and dirt that the algae don't take up.
Right.
How many trucks does it take to pump that out, or how many times do you go up there, depending on how many people? You know, kids using the, you know, with all their dirty clothes.
Yeah, so in the front of the wastewater system, before it goes into the algae wheel portion of the system, there's actually a screening and what we call grit classification device, which basically settles out all of the non-degradable stuff. So all the gross stuff that people flush down the toilets, and dirt, grime, sand, candy bar wrappers. you know, things along those lines, anything gets put down the toilet. We found shoes, don't know how, but we found shoes in these things before. So anything that goes, but that gets taken out in the front, and that goes into a trash can, and just gets hauled away like garbage. That's all just normal garbage. And then the other stuff, the dissolved stuff, goes into the wastewater plant, gets treated, and then you do have a little bit of biological sludge, but that's reduced, it's less than what you have. And it can be hauled away in a couple ways. It can be dried and turned into a solid and taken away. Or it can be taken away in liquid form. That's a little bit more expensive way, because you know, you gotta haul it in a pumper truck. But it can be dried and put into a solid form, just chucked into a landfill, something along those lines. So.
Actually, we might be able to have DNR utilize it for fertilizer in the reserve.
Yeah, it's really common when you dry it down that you can use it as a fertilizer. So if you can get it to the right environmental standards, so as long as you guys aren't flushing, you know, mercury thermometers down the toilet, you're probably going to be okay.
I see where the plant should be, out by the DNR. There you go. The fertilizer, instead of having it in town, where it's around all the people.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's citing, that's not. But yeah, so you can do that. Already referenced the company, there's a company in Mississippi who buys this type of algae-based wastewater sludge. And a lot of you are wearing tennis shoes tonight, and a lot of your tennis shoes actually have foam in them that was constructed with algae wastewater sludge-based plastics. That's being used now. You know, I don't know if you guys remember when GM and Ford and those guys started to use soy foam instead of petroleum foam in the seats in cars and things like that. We're starting to see that happening with wastewater algae sludge. So instead of using a food crop, we're using a waste crop to make those types of plastics.
One thing about,
I just hear the voice.
like right now, I know like my septic system isn't working.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't. After heavy rains in this area,
Yeah.
because of the high water table, we have a lot of problems with our system, our septic systems. So a lot of waste goes into the ground.
Right.
And so just, you could use that as an argument for Eagle about all of the contamination because of our high water table. Every time we get a heavy rain, most springs, a lot of our septic systems don't work for a number of hours. So just want to make that as an issue.
I can tell you, not here, but I have been on sites in communities where I've been out walking around, and they've said, what do you see is wrong here? And I say, the fact that I'm walking around a 1 inch of sewage is probably my first problem I have with this site. So I've been there, right? So I understand what you're saying, that these things happen.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for the supervisor, the senator, and this gentleman here. Would you guys want one in your backyard?
Yeah.
Okay, it's about to be 50 feet from my door wall.
Yeah, so.
There's nothing you can say to convince me that it's not gonna be an eyesore, that it's not gonna smell, and my property values are gonna be worth zero when it goes up. I used to live in a town called Crawlswell, and it's Pioneer Sugar, and they manufacture sugar beets for sugar, and the town's known as the fart town. And they have a giant reservoir for the waste, and the town constantly smells like sulfur or farts. And that's my big fear. And I know it's fighting Goliath, I know it's a lost cause, but that's my feeling. It's gonna be a giant eyesore, literally 50 feet from my door, and it shouldn't be in a residential area, period. So, thank you.
We have a 6-foot screening fence that's gonna go around the whole perimeter, so it'll just look like if your neighbor put up a fence.
Right.
And then we're gonna leave as much of the natural vegetation as possible on the site. Plus, we're gonna do landscaping, pine trees around, and try and make it look as natural.
I can make one real quick comment. I mean, just from the ones I've seen, you saw a lot of the buildings and stuff. I understand, right, what you're talking about. So, but more or less, a lot of them look like pole barns, you know, just like your shed or your garage. But, you know, I've been talking a lot with PCE about things that can be done to help with any accidental odor issues and things. There are odor control devices and things like that, which I always recommend people put in as a just in case, kind of a thing. But
now you have to explain it to a potential buyer that's gonna buy your house. What is that? Oh, it's a big shitter, don't worry about it.
yeah,
They
I
ask
mean,
you,
that's,
honestly,
Yeah.
it's an eyesore. It shouldn't be there. And I'm sorry, people need to rethink it.
This could be answered by the two gentlemen with the black shirts. Are these all going to be gravity-fed lines, or will there be a pressurized line?
Yep, it's all gravity until we get to the plant, then we have a pump station pumping into the facility, so it's all gravity.
Thank you.
What's the life expectancy of this plant?
so, each component has different life expectancies internally, right? So the overall plant life expectancy is going to be around 30 years. You're going to have different components, and we work with the engineers on developing a life cycle cost. So that part of that is maintaining a sinking fund. So that blowers, blowers are blowers, right? And they go out like every 5 or 7 years, and you just know you're going to have to replace one. So you just make sure that you have that money to be able to do that and to replace those. The great thing about these smaller systems that use less air is the blowers are really small, and the blowers don't have a lot of pressure on them, and most of the expense in a blower is making it cope with high pressure situations. And since these blowers only have about 36 inches of pressure, they're really very economical blowers to change. But you have to do things like change the filter on the blower, right? Just like you change the filter on your car, because you don't want crap going into the intake manifold. So you got to do that kind of stuff. And so it's the exact same thing. So there is some general maintenance, but that's part of the operations contract that the guy has to do, is make sure that they take care of all that stuff. And that extends the life.
Structure itself?
It's plastic. I mean, that lasts a long time.
So maintenance-wise, how often does the algae need to be scraped off the wheels?
That's a good question.
How deep is the sludge in the bottom? How often does this need to be cleaned out? And does it require, I can't hear myself.
So her question was, how often do you have to take the algae off the wheels? How do you get the algae off the wheels? How do you get the sludge out of the bottom of the tanks? And how often do you take the sludge out of the bottom of the tanks?
So you're not breathing.
Oh. Okay, so the air bubbles are kind of the secret weapon of the whole system, right? So the air bubbles turn the wheels. The air bubbles give us a little bit of oxygen, not much, but a little bit. But the control system actually turns the blowers up and down throughout the day. So if you're our operator, and you're the one in charge of the wastewater treatment plant, and you say, you know what, there's more algae growing on these wheels than I actually like, you can change the programming on the app, and you can turn the blowers up higher, and what that blower does then is it knocks the algae off the wheels. That algae then, because the bubbles are going and the wheels are turning and it creates a lot of turbulence, then stays suspended in the water and can flow out of the system and over the tube. And, out of the pipe, out of the wastewater plant and go into the clarifier.
So you don't have to clean that off the wheels at all?
No, we just turn the blowers up. So we just turn the blowers up. If there is sludge in the bottom of the tank, that's typically a sign of just neglect. Somebody's not kept the blower up high enough, or maybe the recirculation line is not going fast enough. So the system's designed so things shouldn't be able to settle based on the flow velocity and off of the bubble. So if you start to see that in the bottom, it's usually a sign of, whoops, somebody made a mistake. Usually you can rectify that pretty easily, stir it up a little bit, and turn the air back up so it can flow out. But we've had some go a little south and I got to drain that tank and clean it out, but it's not that big of a deal.
Where does one find a licensed professional wastewater algae?
We have them working for us already at the wastewater treatment plant.
He knows,
Yeah.
he doesn't have to have the special.
No, he's already got that course. If he's running that plant, he's got a license that's probably 2 or 3 levels above the license you need for our plant. Our plant takes a pretty basic license. Larger the plant and the more sophisticated technology typically indicates a more sophisticated license. So if they're working at Algonac, they are gonna have no problem running our facility, so.
First, I just want to say thanks. I look at this as a lifeline for the township, so appreciate the funding for them to be able to state. I got a question for you, Dr. Gann, as well as John. Phase 1, phase 2 timing, assuming Eagle success.
That's more of a John thing, frankly.
Yours is coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like, I can do it tomorrow.
So the good thing is, fortunately, we already have $2 million that's been earmarked for this project. So the next steps are, after we get through Eagle, is actually we're going to not only have to get through Eagle for the wetland issue, but then also for the treatment process issue, which Dan is working on. And then it's time to design the facility, soil borings on the site, so we see what kind of the groundwater conditions, the soil conditions, what we have to deal with to design it. So there's months that it's going to take to go through that process. It's probably not something that's going to happen this next summer. It's probably going to be the following or somewhere in between. It's probably a 9-month period of time, I'm guessing.
Okay, so 24, 25 calendar year for phase 1. Phase 2?
Here again, we're going through a process. Is it in April that we're going after additional grant funding?
Yeah, we got a couple options for additional money.
So when you go through grant funding programs, they actually take longer. So what will happen is it takes time to, one, get awarded the grant. And then once you get awarded the grant, you're usually applying through a specific government program that they want to follow for that process. In this case, we have money that's directly earmarked, so we don't have to follow the process. But if you go under like a CWSRF program, some other SRF program, there's a specific guideline and process that you have to follow with that. So in our experience with that, start to finish is probably a 2-year period.
Thank you. So 26, 27 residents, 120 could realize that.
If additional money comes and it works out, maybe sooner.
Okay. The question for Dr. Gann. Scalability, 120 homes is nothing.
Yeah, so we actually just talked about this earlier today, so, what's that? Oh yeah, so a lot of times what we do in terms of scalability is like you have one existing wastewater plant, there's sort of 2 ways to do it. You can take the discharge from one wastewater plant and then run it through a new expansion, so you just make it longer. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to sort of duplicate exactly what you did and put it right next to it. And then then you have 2 different process trains running side by side. And I can tell you typically regulators like it when they're side by side because that way if one breaks, the other one runs. So they like what they call redundancy. But we have done it both ways, where you put them in a series or you put them in parallel. So it's just a matter of doing that. Yeah?
To add to what you're just talking about, at some point, you lose gravity going to your plant.
Yeah.
How far out can you go before you need to put in a booster station in?
Right, that's gonna come down to John and, the elevations, because he's gonna have to go out and measure those elevations and do all that, so that's all gonna come down to that.
So as we all know, the island's pretty flat. So the big deal here is what happens is based on the soil conditions is where we'll determine, it'll come to a point where you go, well, I'm trying to go in here 20 feet deep and it's a mess. Or it's really poor conditions at that point, you put in a lift station, start over again at a shallower depth and continue on. And that is always based on the soil conditions or the constraints, how much area do we have to work within, how deep could we go realistically without the project being a ridiculous cost.
So sounds like the town of Naples has about the same number of residents that we have here on the island. I was curious if you know any of the statistics about the costs for that town. since all of the residents except for 2 are connected.
Yeah, so phase 1, all but 2 connected, and now they're gonna connect all the rest. So cost in terms of monthly bill, I think they pay $45 a month, I think is what they pay for.
Yeah, I think it is 45, but they actually have debt that they have to recoup. In building their they had to actually float bonds to do a portion of it.
So they didn't get grant money like.
Right.
They got portions.
They got portions of grant money.
Melanie, so
Yeah.
smart.
And they're hilly, which makes the collection system more expensive because you gotta go up and over hills and you run into rocks and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit different situation there. Yeah. Right now, they've got about 150 to 200 homes hooked up to the current one. They're running 50,000 gallons through it today. So, yeah.
Artie, is there any idea yet what the final cost of this thing is gonna be? At one point, it was bandied around that we had 3.6 million in grants, but John says 2.
Oh, the total cost of the project? It's gonna be somewhere between 3.5 and 4 million.
Yeah, the question over here was, do they typically stay on budget? From my perspective on the plant stuff, typically we stay on budget because, you know, we've built these a lot, so we work with the contractors. Like we do, like when we go to bid these or work with the contractors, I'll come back and I'll sit down with all the contractors that are interested and I will tell them, here's what you do, here's where everybody screws up, please read this paragraph, don't skip that line, please pay attention, please look what the engineer said here, everybody ignores that, but please pay attention, and we'll go through the problem stuff, and then that minimizes what we call change orders and those kinds of problem things in the construction process. So I always like to try to come back up for the construction meeting. Myself or a project manager would come up to go through actually how to build it. And then we also try to do like sourcing all the concrete as locally as possible. So that way if there's any issues in shipping or quality or anything like that, it's all done here locally. So we're not trying to ship things, you know, from Ohio or something like that.
Dan?
I don't.
So Dan, I just read an article recently that said small amounts of bleach will kill the activity in your septic tank. So what if someone dumps a gallon of bleach down their sink? What's that going to do to this system, or other chemicals, phosphates, laundry soaps, whatever?
So phosphates and laundry soaps aren't really an issue for the treatment of the system because the algae actually really like the phosphate. That's one of the things that causes algae blooms in rivers is phosphate. So whenever phosphate goes in the river, that's what causes the algae to bloom typically. That's like usually the restricted nutrient. So the algae system is actually better than most typical systems at removing phosphorus. In fact, that's what a lot of agencies are now regulating phosphorus as one of the nutrients that they want to not see come out of wastewater plants. Bleach I have no problem with in terms of the normal people using their laundry and washing their whites and things like that because, you know, it gets diluted. And so if I've got 25,000 gallons a day coming through the wastewater plant and someone pours a gallon in there, that's going to be pretty diluted. I was telling Artie, the one that scares me is like porta potty, blue water, or people that put the chemicals in their black water tank on their RVs. Those can kill like 1 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plants. Those are the ones that scare me. But bleach, we've never had an issue with this size system with bleach. That micro system that I showed you, the little school, they had a person pour a bottle of quaternary ammonia, which is like a kitchen grade sanitizer. It's like concentrated Lysol. And that killed that plant, for sure. It was crazy. It was like all bubbly and foamy and everything died. And like, what'd you do? Like, oh, we poured this down the sink because we're trying to clean the pipes out. And like, oh, they stunk. Oh, that's what happened. Because it poured it down a urinal. Yeah, it recovered though. Yeah, it bounced back. Antifreeze is not great, but it's carbon. So what it does is it's not great from the standpoint that antifreeze causes shock load. So your VOD level goes way up all of a sudden, so it makes the plant work harder. So sometimes it upsets the plant a little bit, but that won't kill a plant off. It's like, if you're used to eating like one slice of pizza a day, and then I all of a sudden gave you, they said, no, sit down and eat three pizzas right now, the entire thing, you'd get a tummy ache. Same thing with the wastewater plant. They're biological organisms, and you know, they can get upset like that a little bit.
Dr. Dan?
Yeah.
Could you explain the clarification process and the water byproduct, where it will go, and how often the sludge will be hauled away?
Yeah, so clarification processes are, so like when the water comes out of the algae wheel system, there's, you know, suspended algae and bacteria, right? And so Eagle says, we don't want you to put more than a certain concentration into the river. So we need to make sure we get that concentration down to a certain level. So it's kind of a 3-step process that we're talking about here. It goes through a tank that looks a lot like a septic tank, except it's got an inverted pyramid on the bottom. So the solids kind of settle into the bottom, and then they thicken in the bottom. That gets pumped out. Typically, we run a pump about 2 minutes a day. That pumps out about 120, 160 gallons a day of that solids into a digester tank, basically first, so it gets aerated. And so in that aeration tank, basically what we're doing is we're breaking that down, trying to reduce the amount of sludge, and break it down in that digester so it gets turned into carbon dioxide gas and doesn't stink. And that can reduce those solids even further. That's the first part. Also on the clarifier, there's a little thing that sucks the scum off the top. So sometimes there's floaties. So there's a little thing on top that sucks those solids and sends it over that sludge tank too for digestion. And then what happens is you digest it, and then you turn off the air and you let everything settle down in the tank, and then you turn on a little pump and it pumps the clear water back to the head of the plant to go through treatment again. And then you thicken it that way. So then you go from, like, say, 1% solids to 2% solids to 3% solids. And so if we stopped right there, like just say, oh gosh, we got no more money, we're done, we can't do anything else. That tank here would have to be emptied out roughly every 80 days and take it away. And that'd be like one pumper truck, you know, every 80 days for that particular tank. So right there, it's kind of a savings because, you know, instead of pumping out a lot of tanks, you're pumping out more concentrated sludge. What typically gets recommended if you want to try to use these solids for fertilizers or for sale or something like that, you take that solid, you let it settle, and you pump it out and you run it through basically a screw press, and it squeezes all the water out of it. And when you do that, you add lime to it that raises the pH, which then kills all the bacteria that's in it, and so it makes it sterile. And then it basically can go into a garbage can. And so that's the most efficient way to dispose of solids.
Would be discharged into the river?
The water that comes out of the clarifier, where the solids in, that water comes out of the clarifier, and the current plan is from there is it's going to go through a filter, a cloth filter. So water goes into this drum, and then the inside, from outside of the filter to the inside, it goes out of a pipe. Then it goes through a UV disinfection system, which kills all the bacteria. And so then whenever that water goes into the river, it should have less than 5 parts per million of suspended solids. And all of the bacterial count, it's what we call 1 colony per 100 milliliters of water. So if you put it on a petri dish, put 100 milliliters of water, which is about a shot. Then you put that on a petri dish, you get 1 bacterial colony that would form. People would be happy with that. So,
how warm is that discharge?
What's that?
How warm of water is it?
It'll warm up about 2 or 3 degrees in the process. So if it comes in at 50 degrees, it'll probably leave the system, 53, 54 degrees, something
With all
like
the
that.
sunlight?
Yeah, from the sunlight in the greenhouse and just, the air blowing through it and stuff like that.
For PCI, based on the current site, is there any scalability available in that site? Or are we limited to the 25,000?
No, you're looking for expansion? Yeah, we could easily double it on that site.
So on this size system, the operator, he takes a sample, and then typically what they have to do is is Alganac an Eagle certified lab? So Alganac has an Eagle certified lab, so most likely what they do is they take those samples to Alganac. They would run those samples, and then it gets reported through an online system, saying what their discharge was, and whether it complies or not. And then that's how, and then Eagle reviews that, and so does the US EPA. Yeah.
Okay, this is more for Mr. Bryson. Is there any competition for this? Or is this the only source sought?
Actually, we looked at 3 or 4, and this one made more sense because it works with high flows and low flows. I know we did a lot of looking at and talking with a company called ClearAs, and they use algae technology to refine the water, treat the water, and they're more for high volume plants. They couldn't do a small batch plant like this, and that's what's beautiful with the algae wheel system. It works when it's busy or when there's very little flow going to the plant. It still works well.
We've sort of focused on, we've cut our teeth on the plants that nobody else wanted to do. It was kind of how we got our start. So we did like campgrounds, RV parks, schools, things like that where you get, like I was telling Artie, you go to school, all the kids come in at 8 o'clock and go pee. And there's nothing else. And then at lunchtime they go pee. And then there's nothing until the next day. And then Friday night there's a football game. And then everybody comes and goes and pees. And so like the plants getting lots of waste and then no waste and lots of, and which wastewater plants hate. But that's how we started off, is doing parks, schools, things along those lines. Yeah.
One thing I think we forgot to mention too, we're going to look into being able to accept from people's septic fields. If you get your septic tank pumped from Rattree or something, we're going to look at being able to accept that in our plant. They'll have to pay for it. It'll be additional charge. But that way, Rattree, he can do 5-6 tanks a day versus, doing 1 or 2 tanks going across and dumping wherever and then coming back. So.
Yeah. Well, got one more question over here real quick. Yeah.
What if it fails? Like, what's the emergency?
So the operator, so fail's a big word. Right? So like you have to first define what does fail mean.
Like, worst case scenario.
Like the plant blows up.
I think what she's meaning, if it shuts down.
The Canadians crossed the border and sabotage it. It's like, you're too green, you're getting rid of the plant. Yeah. Yeah, what's that? Yeah. So the pumps. So pumps are a thing that fail, right? So whenever we do design, typically, like I was going through stuff this morning, I said, I have 2 blowers in my system. Only one blower is ever running. So there's one blower running, then it hands off to the other blower. So there's always a backup blower. And then whenever we provide a package, we give you a 3rd blower that just sits on the ground until you need it. So if you do have one that burns up, there's automatically a replacement. Same with all of the pumps in the pump stations. Like John will tell you, like when they design pump stations to get the water from the city to the wastewater plant, typically those pump stations have 2 or 3 pumps in there, and they're oversized to be able to handle rainwater, or they'll have like two pumps that are smaller and then 2 pumps that are bigger. So there's a lot of redundancy that gets built in. Eagle has a lot to say about that. Like Eagle has very strict guidelines about redundancy and backups. But then a lot of that comes down to operations and maintenance. So the operator needs to be able to say, hey, we need to periodically rebuild the pump, right? You periodically have to take your car in for an oil change. You periodically have to fix the pump. And it's the same kind of thing. So that all is what happens. And typically, whenever we see problems in any wastewater plant, it's typically because of neglect or human neglect. Like they're just too short-staffed, or that one's too far to go to. I've been to plants where they've got like duct tape over all the buttons, except for one, and it's been that way for 10 years. And that's like a pump station on the edge of town. It's like, guys, this needs to be fixed. But that's not my plant. That was like an existing plant. So it takes maintenance. Typically failures happen with lack of maintenance.
What about economic, eco standpoint, as far as if it does fail, because part of the expression, shit happens.
Shit happens, yeah.
The marsh that we have surrounding this island is unique in the sense that it will filter.
Right.
Will any of that be utilized in the discharge going to, before it hits the lake?
So not intentionally discharging into the marsh, right?
No.
No, we're not intentionally discharging into a marsh or anything along those lines, it's going into the river. So what'll happen, so like what Eagle will do, in my experience, I don't know, I can't read their mind, but they'll look at the river, they'll see what the water quality is in the river, they'll look at their guidelines, and they'll say, here's what the guidelines are, and then they'll say, here's the quality of water we want going into the river. And then that's what they'll tell me and John, it has to be this good. And then they'll say, okay, we want to see this level of redundancy. So I don't know if you noticed in the drawing, but there were 2 tanks running in parallel. So pretty much everything has 2 of everything in the system. So if there's ever an issue, the plant is built for 25,000 gallons a day, but it can handle up to 50,000 gallons a day. And so that's built in there and engineered into the system, so that way if half the system did fail, theoretically half the system could still sustain itself until that other half was fixed. So there is a lot of redundancy built into these, because Eagle does their job, and they put those regulations, 10 state standards puts those regulations in, and then me not wanting to mess anything up. Like, I'm an aquatic biologist by training, like that's, like, I got into this work because I was studying how wastewater treatment plants screwed up rivers and streams. That's how I got involved with algae. So I studied algae and bacterial systems in rivers. And I said, oh, if that rock is cleaning the water, can I do this in a better way? And that's how I ended up working with Algae Wheel. So I'm probably like the most eco-geek in the room here, most likely. So yeah, so I take my job very seriously when it comes to treating the water from an environmental standpoint.
What street is the discharge water going to go down?
Maple.
No,
It's gonna go out in the water. I think we're using the upstream side.
Yes,
Yes.
opposite of the water.
No, it's actually gonna be in front of the landing.
Yeah, but opposite side of the water main.
Right.
We have a water main.
North side of Maple.
Yeah. Any questions for Dan or? We're having a Proof 101 class, aren't we?
Thanks, Artie. So if I understand correctly, we've got funding that'll pay for half of it, half of the physical plant now, so that...
The plant and the collection system for San Souci.
What's the plan to get the balance of the funding then to get through phase 1?
No, we have the funding to do phase 1. It's all. Yep. And then phase 2, we're seeking funding. There's money available through Eagle, and there's some other avenues too.
So the 3 to 4 million is for phase 1 and 2 combined?
Yes. Okay. You have one more question. If you guys you're not obligated, if you're interested, fill out one of the forms with your name and address, and we'll put you on the list.
If you tie in, what happens with the existing tanks requirements?
I am not sure. I want to thank Dr. Dan, Project Control, Senator Hertel, Representative DeBoyer, and everybody else, and thank you guys for coming out.